I think there is great frustration that Trump is not taking a tougher line on Putin, and this would give him the tools to say, here, do this.
Let me now welcome to Drive Kurt Volker, former US ambassador. Hello to you, Ambassador.
Hello, good to be with you, John.
It's good to have you here. So, look, President Trump, as I say, he described the talks between Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff on the US side and Putin as having gone reasonably well. Do you think those talks went reasonably well, Ambassador?
Well, in the sense that there was no surrender of Ukraine or by Ukraine, that didn't happen. So I suppose in that sense, that's good. But there was really no surprise to what happened in those talks. After the 28-point plan, which had been terribly one-sided towards Russia, was transformed by Marco Rubio and the Ukrainians and Europeans into something reasonable, of course, Putin rejected that.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened in Moscow. He simply said, no, we want everything.
So, of course, you acknowledge in diplomatic language that at those talks in Moscow, nothing was achieved. Russian demands remained unchanged, and Putin threw in a warning that he was ready to go to war with Europe for good measure. And he also, as the Secretary General of NATO pointed out, posed in military fatigues. There's nothing encouraging about any of that, is there? And should President Trump recognise that and act accordingly?
Well, we've been saying this for many, many months now, that we all know that Vladimir Putin started this war. He's the only one that wants this war. Ukraine doesn't want it. Europe doesn't want it. America doesn't want it. And indeed, Ukraine's ready to have a ceasefire right now, but Russia is not. So the only thing to do is to put pressure on Putin financially, economically, militarily, to get him to the point where he also feels like he needs a ceasefire.
Yes.
And that's been true since the first day of the Trump administration. It's true today still.
Well, I mean that's just transparently true, is it not? And meanwhile, beneath all of that, well, President Trump argues that his prime concern is to stop people being killed, which is a perfectly laudable aim. It is also perfectly fair to argue that he's not doing nearly enough to bring that about. The American policy prior to the second Trump term was to do more. It was to provide weapons to Ukraine, to support NATO more fully. And now America is selling arms, not giving arms to Ukraine, and taking a neutral stand at best. As an American, as a diplomat, as someone who wants to see America, uphold traditional, standard, historic American values, this must be distressing to you.
Well, it's really very, very frustrating because, you go back to those phone calls that Steve Witkoff had with Ushakov and with Dmitriev. And here he was treating Russia as a partner of the United States when Russia is the aggressor that is raping and killing and so forth and has started this war in Ukraine. But treating Russia as a partner and viewing Ukraine as something just to be decided about, something to be divvied up.
Yes.
That's really very offensive because we not only have, a set of moral issues here about war and war crimes and abduction of children and so forth. We also have interests, and we have an interest in not seeing an aggressor rewarded and fueling the fires of further war in Europe. So I think those calls were very distressing. Now, Trump, I think he, as you said, I think he genuinely wants there to be an end to the war, stop to the killing, just no more killing. And what he refuses to accept is that the only reason there is killing going on is because of Russia's continuing war against Ukraine. So I know he wants a deal with Putin. I know he wants business deals on the back end of that. But if you want to get to that point of ending the killing, you've got to get Putin to stop it.
All right. Ambassador, America is, of course, such an important player in the global balance of power, such an important part of NATO, a pillar of the Western alliance, which is why we're so keen to talk to someone such as you as often as we are. But we see a curious situation in Washington. I'm keen to get your analysis. The president takes the position that we're discussing now. Congress has always been a player in this too, and there are voices on both sides of the aisle in Congress who want to see a much more assertive position, American policy position. There's even legislation in Congress to punish countries dealing in trading with Russia. Do you see any hope of that legislation, which is being put forward by, well, among others, people like Lindsey Graham, who's a hawk on this subject? Do you see any hope in that legislation, any hope in Congress taking a more assertive position?
Well, I do up to a point. So that legislation that you're referring to, it's secondary sanctions, secondary tariffs perhaps as well, on countries that are trading in Russian oil and gas or entities that are trading in Russian oil and gas. I think there is great frustration that Trump is not taking a tougher line on Putin, and this would give him the tools to say, here, do this.
Hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that it obligates Trump to do so. There
No.
would be a waiver clause in there, and therefore, I think it's more likely that the Senate would indeed pass it
Yes.
because there is still the option for Trump to decide how to play that card.
Yes.
Now, part of the dynamic that we should be talking about here is midterm elections and the perceptions of Republicans, perceptions of President Trump. For all of this year, um, Republicans in Congress have not wanted to distance themselves from President Trump at all. He's been very strong with the Republican base, the MAGA base. They need that support. They need the votes. They need the
Yes.
Republican National Committee's financing. So they have been reluctant to step away. As we see President Trump's approval rating go down
Yes.
in recent weeks, if that becomes a sustained trend, that's also something that will give Republicans some reason to want to show a little daylight
Right.
with what Trump is doing. Now, it may not be on foreign policy. It might be, say, on tariffs or on inflation. But I think that that dynamic may kick in next year if it looks like they're going to be losing in midterm elections by not having any coattails to ride on.
That's an important point, isn't it? It's fair to summarise what you said, is it not? In this sort of simple, crude way, by saying as President Trump's lame duck status starts to grow, well, then more traditional American ideas of security, including on the Republican side, will grow too.
Well, I don't think those ideas ever disappeared in the Republican Party or in Congress, only in President Trump and that MAGA fraction of the Republican Party, but they are in power right now. And I think that you will see those more traditional ideas sustained throughout the Trump presidency and beyond. Now, his lame duck status, it's interesting you mentioned that. I think that President Trump is very conscious about the possibility of becoming a lame duck and wanting to do everything possible to mitigate that. I think that's why he talks about a third term. And I think that's why he's setting up a competition for the Republican nomination between Rubio and Vance, where he would be the decider, because that will continue to make him relevant.
I mean, before you leave us, Ambassador, I'm really grateful to you as always for coming on. I'm going to move on in a moment and talk about another interesting story in the United States, which concerns Donald Trump Jr., of course, the president's son, who is behind an investment fund, and a company supported by that fund has been given a $600 million contract by the Pentagon, which raises obvious concerns about conflicts of interest and preferential treatment. I mean, do you share those concerns?
Well, I do, and I'm more concerned about the international dynamics. That's one where there are Pentagon processes, there's contracting processes. The selection criteria ought to be transparent. If there are questions about that, they should be investigated. And it gives the appearance that the president's family is benefiting directly from contracts from the Pentagon. You'd have to ask about that. You'd have to wonder about that, and it's certainly not a good look. What I'm more concerned about is the international dimension, where you have companies associated with the Trumps, with Jared Kushner, with Steve Witkoff, that are doing deals internationally at the same time that we are trying to engage foreign leaders. So there's a bit more of a concern that they are buying their way in and out of things.
All right, good to get your concerns. Interesting for us. Ambassador Kurt Volker, thank you.